The Drug That Makes Criminals Talk by David Dressler. Popularly called the truth serums, the new hypnotics have proved a boon both to medicine and to criminology. Remember the Herons case, the mad dog Espositos. A man lay in the prison ward of a hospital. For days he steadfastly maintained he was innocent of a brutal murder. He challenged his questioners to use the lie detector anything. He was injected with sodium pentothal, whereupon he confessed to the killing. A young girl was found wandering the streets of Brooklyn, a victim of amnesia. She had no memory of her name, address, or family, although she tried desperately to remember. A day later, after the administration of sodium amytal, her memory returned, and she was restored to her family. A combat plane dropped out of the North African skies and limped into the field. The door opened, and the waiting ground force gently brought out the dead and wounded. Last, the pilot stepped out, tense, shaken, and exhausted. Untouched by bullets, he was drenched from head to foot with the blood of his comrades. After a long sleep, he found he had lost the power of speech, and his legs seemed paralyzed. With the aid of a psychiatrist using sodium pentothal, he was restored to health. What are these chemicals that produce such seeming miracles? They are hypnotic drugs, popularly known as truth serums. Neither serums nor absolute guarantors of the truth, they nevertheless have proved a boon to medicine and criminology. Their great value lies in the fact that they put the individual into a trance-like state, helping him to talk on subjects he would ordinarily be too fearful, pained, or ashamed to discuss. His inhibitions are lowered. He no longer tries to withhold the truth. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is what the criminal investigator is after. The guilty suspect, of course, has the opposite goal. He wants to tell lies, good lies, and nothing but consistent lies. In this battle of wits between criminal and law enforcement officer, many devices have been used. Not all of them pretty. They have included the rubber hose and the bare fist. These have a definite tendency to cause some suspects to confess. But, unfortunately, many of them confess to crimes they did not commit. The lie detector is much more scientific and humane, but not yet entirely accurate. Now comes the hypnotic drug, which may elicit the real truth without pain to the suspect and with great benefit to the court. A businessman was found beaten almost to death. He named as his assailant a partner, whom we shall call Jones. The two had quarrelled violently for weeks. At Jones's home, police found him in a curious condition. His right arm was pressed inflexibly against his chest, the fist clenched. "How," he asked, "could I have assaulted anyone in this condition?" He explained, awakened one morning 3 weeks ago to find himself crippled. No, he had received no medical treatment. He kept hoping the arm would cure itself. If he was crippled before the assault, he was bound to be innocent. If after the crime he might have developed such a symptom as the result of shock following the assault, and still be guilty. Or he could be faking the condition and hoping to ride through to freedom on it. Would he prove the truth of his story by undergoing a test? Certainly, he emphatically stated he feared no examination. So, Mr. Jones was placed in a semi-darkened room on a comfortable couch. A doctor examined him to make sure he did not suffer from some condition which might make the hypnotic drug dangerous. A heart ailment, liver disease, hardening of the arteries. The hypnotic sodium pentothal was administered in solution. It was slowly injected by needle into a vein. Mr. Jones was asked to count backwards from the number 100. He began 199, 98, 97. Before long his counting became confused. A pleasant feeling of sleepiness overcame him. He felt good. His face flushed, his blood pressure fell slightly, and his pulse rate increased. Deeper and deeper he went into the hypnotic state. Slowly, the flexed arm relaxed. It fell limply to his side. He began to mutter, to writhe on the couch. He had entered what physicians call a delirioid dream state. The crime is reenacted. Now the doctor set the stage choir. You are in a home at 1234 X Street. The partners. There is a couch against one wall, 2 easy chairs and a drum table. The table has a large student lamp on it. Yes, that's my partner's home. Go on from there. The suspect opened his eyes wide. His pupils dilated. His skin became covered with fine perspiration. His breathing was rapid and shallow as the words poured out. That skunk! Why did he have to do it? He knows I have to live. Oh, my head. I feel like I'm dreaming. He can't do it to me, that skunk. He broke the contract, not me. Excitedly, he described the dishonest acts of his partner. He screamed at him, berated him. He jumped off the couch and paced the floor. He swung his fists in the air and shouted, "You'll never get away with it." He returned to the couch and lay back. Then he sat up straight and yelled, "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" He collapsed back on the couch, sobbing. A long pause, then deliberately, he sat up again and hissed, "I'm going to fix you and fix you right. You won't get out of this one. How you like that?" He whipped his fist upward. "You skunk. Not so good, huh? Like it there." He fell back and seemed in a stupor for several minutes. Then he began to rehearse how he would pretend he was crippled. He would fool the police. They won't get me. He deserved it. Now the drug began to wear off. Jones awoke. The doctor told him what he had revealed. Tears formed in his eyes. A few questions from the police, and he had confessed. Hirons who kidnapped and murdered the little Degnan girl in Chicago 2 years ago steadfastly refused to confess, but, convinced he could outwit the detectives under any circumstances, he allowed himself to be put under the influence of sodium pentothal. He then gave full details of the killing and even described other crimes he had committed and of which he had not been suspected. After his story was supported by evidence secured through the clues he furnished, it made no difference that he later protested his innocence. The case was solved. It illustrated, however, one of the several legal and medical limitations on the employment of hypnotics in criminal cases. Neither Hirons nor any other prisoner could have been given the drug unless he consented. To force it on a defendant violates his constitutional rights, for it places him in the position of being compelled to testify against himself. Only a small proportion of defendants give permission. When they do, it may be that they are not too clear on how they will be affected by the hypnotic, in spite of explanation. Or it might be because the prisoner believes he can bug the bug doctor. He hopes to stick to his story under the drug, and thus copper-rivet his defence. Even when consent is given, the hoped-for result may not accrue. Some observers believe a prisoner can sometimes resist the drug. Interestingly enough, however, a specialist in criminal psychiatry, Dr. Ralph S. Banai, formerly psychiatrist of Sing Sing Prison, believes any reticence on the part of a suspect can be broken down unless the constitutional state of his body is such that the drug does not affect him at all. Otherwise, a properly administered and sufficient dose, he says, immobilizes the will and inhibitions, leaving the individual powerless to resist talking truthfully, even allowing for a margin of evasion. These hypnotics prove invaluable to the criminal investigator in many ways. An arrested prisoner claims insanity as a defence. Is he truly insane or malingering? As has happened, the prisoner may actually admit in the dream state that he has been malingering. It is not always a simple matter, however, to determine whether a prisoner is sane or insane beyond peradventure. When the two mad dog Espositos, killers of a paymaster and a policeman, were brought to the death house at Sing Sing, they had not uttered a word during a year of prior confinement. They made only animal sounds, grunting, snorting, and barking like dogs. One crawled about on all fours. The other held himself rigid and did not walk. The trial was over, but it was still important to discover whether they were indeed insane or merely feigning. The governor would want to know, should he be considering commutation of the death sentence to life term? Dr. Benet, before witnesses, injected sodium amytal and benzodrine sulfate, the latter, to prevent too deep a sleep. As the drugs took effect, the animal-like killers relaxed. They smiled. Then one stood erect. Finally, both talked. And it was baby talk. They pleaded for candy, pouted. The rigid brother complained to his mother, seen in his reverie, about mistreatment. He showed her what purported to be bruises and pleaded for sympathy. The other imagined himself playing ball, cavorting about the cell. Both kept crying, "I want my mama." A guard was introduced into the cell, and the brothers were told he was mama. Whereupon, the more active of these two tough, depraved gunmen embraced some pie. What were the conclusions? One psychiatrist reasoned that the prisoners were insane. These infantile reactions, he said, were characteristic, under the drug, only of the insane. Another considered them sane. They resisted the drugs and were faking the entire thing, he felt. They were finally deemed sane, although the question is still moot among medical men, and executed. But a case of this sort indicates no more than that the use of hypnotic drugs in criminal investigation is only in the beginning stages. Undoubtedly, as more is learned about the actions of hypnotics, they will play an increasingly vital role in police and court work. Their results may eventually be accepted in evidence. The lie detector at first had no standing in court, but today many jurisdictions accept its evidence. Hypnotic drugs already enjoy a secure place in areas outside criminal investigation. They have been found efficacious where a person suffers from a condition requiring preliminary treatment before a remedy can be found. Amnesia is an example. The all-important goal at the outset is to discover who the person is, where he belongs, how to restore his memory quickly. A person suffering from this ailment is trying to run away from himself. He has lived through something that has become intolerable. He cannot face it any longer. He literally escapes from his unhappiness by losing his identity. That was the trouble with the girl, about 16, brought to a hospital when she lost her memory and found herself wandering through the railroad station. She had forgotten even her name. Psychiatric interviews got nowhere. The girl wouldn't answer questions. She wasn't interested in what went on. All that could be got from her was the statement that she must find work and the repeated words, "I want to go to Texas." After a period of bed rest, sodium pentothal was administered. Thereupon she unfolded a dramatic, emotional story, reliving many incidents in her immediate past. She described how her parents upbraided her for going to dance halls. She reenacted what she considered mistreatment by teachers, and spoke of a friend in Texas. As she talked, she named places in a nearby city. The police of that city were notified, and within an hour the girl's mother was on her way. At first, the patient did not recognize her or admit her own identity. The next morning, however, she remembered her mother, was lucid, alert and cooperative. She recalled her identity and was discharged as recovered. The causes of her amnesia had not been eliminated, to be sure. The troubles from which she had escaped by amnesia might bring on another blackout. To be able to face life more maturely, she would need further psychiatry care. But sodium pentothal had at least brought her to the point where that treatment was possible. The use of hypnotics for such quick action is not new. In fact, they have been used for many purposes for a long time. As early as 1847, a hospital for the insane administered them, on the assumption that the deep sleep they could induce would rest the diseased mind and restore the mental faculties. What the patients might say while under a drug did not seem important at the time. Dr. W.J. Bleckwen, in 1930, used hypnotics with dementia praecox patients to produce a lucid interval, during which they might give some indication of what started the illness. It was some years later that hypnotics began to be used with patients suffering mental emotional disturbances called neuroses. The English physician, J. Stephen Horsley, was one of the earliest experimenters. Doctors Roy R. Grinker and John P. Spiegel pioneered in World War II, developing a technique they named narcosynthesis. Doctors Lawrence S. Cubier and Sidney G. Margolin of New York are among the foremost scientific men now working with narcosynthesis in this country. But all psychiatrists consulted by the writer are unanimous in emphasizing that narcosynthesis is no cure-all. Many emotional illnesses will not be cured through hypnotic drugs. These medical men warn possible patients, don't raise your hopes unduly. Don't consider your case necessarily one for narcosynthesis. Dr. Gringer comments, every time the subject of hypnotic drugs has been discussed in lay periodicals, we have received hundreds of eager applications from mentally ill people who want to be cured. In many instances, they have been disappointed because narcosynthesis can be used only with a small group of patients and only by psychiatrists with a thorough grounding in psychoanalysis, a branch of the science which holds that there is more in the subconscious of a mind than is dreamed of in our philosophy. In North Africa, Grinker and Spiegel treated RAF and American ground and air forces personnel for combat fatigue, a euphemism for neurosis. They returned 90% of their patients to duty. In their book, Men Under Stress, they describe how the psychiatrist tries to discover the true source of the neurosis. Such a condition usually stems from unpleasant experiences and shocks. Yet the patient has forgotten the past, or he refuses to discuss it because it is too painful. But until he does remember and face the causes of his illness, he will not be cured. Now, how to get at these causes? In many cases, the hypnotic drugs are very useful. Under their influence, the patient begins to examine himself and his experiences in a more detached manner than he could when he was fully awake. He begins to recall forgotten painful incidents. He returns again and again to those storm centers of his life that furnish a clue to his condition. Grinker and Spiegel vividly outline their methods in getting at these clues. They learn all they can about the background of the patient. Then they explain to him what they are about to do and why. The drug is injected. When the patient is under its influence, the doctor suggests a topic for discussion. With a flyer it might be, "You are in the air. An enemy plane opens up on you. Go on." The flyer exhibits an electrifying terror as he recollects and acts out moments of danger. He reacts frantically to an explosion in the plane, the death of a pal. His body tenses. He begins to talk passionately, hysterically. He may jump from his bed, pace the room, dodge a shell. He often whimpers, sobs, shrieks. The doctor follows the mood of the patient. He consoles him when his pal is shot. He may call out a warning that an enemy plane is in sight. One flyer who saw himself up too high hysterically cried, "I can't breathe! Oxygen! Oxygen!" The doctor placed his hand over the patient's nose and mouth, saying, "Here's oxygen." The flyer breathed in deeply, showing obvious relief. Now the drug begins to wear off. Up to now, only the physician had learned what produced the illness. Now, the patient must be brought to understand it too. The depth of his dream reverie is decreasing. He still remembers the painful situations and the feelings they aroused in him, but he is becoming increasingly aware of the doctor and his immediate environment. Now is the time to explain, before the recollections are lost again. The doctor suggests what he thinks was the cause of the troubled events which the patient could not face before. Finally, when the drug has worn off and the patient is fully awake, the psychiatrist encourages him to interpret how these events and emotions produced his present condition. Only in this manner will the sick man learn how to work his way out of his illness. The drug itself, in such a case, does not cure. It only facilitates a cure by furnishing information. Hypnotic drugs are not a substitute for psychiatry. Most doctors agree they should be used only when the patient refuses to bring up enough of his recollections in a waking state. A flyer was being treated for operational fatigue, in a case described by Grinker and Spiegel in Men Under Stress. Under sodium pentothal, he talked spontaneously, revealingly. "I want out. The army is no good. I want to be with my wife and to go home to her every night. I want to stop shaking. The public don't like it and I'm ashamed before people. The army ruined me, never did me any good, and let me out. I want out. I want my wife. She's all I live for. She consoles me when I'm hurt. She encourages me when officers are mean. I'm only a little fell low. I can't be happy in the army. Please let me out." In a waking state, this pitiful soul could not be brought to display so nakedly his fears, anxieties, resentments, and need for love. Now, with the clues furnished, treatment might bring relief. It has been found that the cases which can be treated by this technique are those in which the ailment is of fairly recent origin. A normally stable individual suffers a sudden shock. He's in a train wreck, or his wife leaves him, or a beloved relative dies. Shortly thereafter, he develops a symptom for which there is no organic basis: nausea or vertigo, perhaps the loss of his voice, sight, or the ability to walk. Up to now, psychiatric treatment in cases like these has been lengthy and costly. To get the patient to recall and discuss relevant facts might take a year or two. Today, it is possible to save some patients time and money through the use of narcosynthesis, because it cuts down the treatment time by producing fast recall. One young woman developed strong anxieties. She was full of obsessions about marriage and feared men without knowing why. Under ordinary psychiatric treatment, she revealed nothing of interest. Sodium pentothal was administered. She then recalled, re-experienced, and dramatically described, with great emotion, an incident in which she had been approached by an exhibitionist who, she thought, had wanted to attack her. Once this became part of her conscious recollection, Once she had talked it out and understood how such an event could have affected her, she lost all her symptoms. Whenever hypnotics are discussed, the question inevitably arises: can an unscrupulous person, by their use, cause someone to commit an antisocial act? What is to prevent a Svengali from suggesting a murder? Dr. Benet, asked about this, described a hair-raising experiment by the famous psychiatrists Charcot and Bernstein. Orthodox hypnotism was employed, but hypnotic drugs would presumably bring the same reactions. A heretofore law-abiding citizen was hypnotized and told to shoot a given person in the room. There was a real and a toy pistol on the desk. There was a live victim-to-be and a dummy. When the subject was given the toy pistol, he shot at the live victim, if that was the suggestion. Given the real gun, he shot at the dummy. But he would not fire the real pistol at the real person. Fortunate guinea pig. But suppose, the doctor was asked, the hypnotized subject harbored real hostility against someone. Could he be induced to shoot him? That, Dr. Benet replied, has never been demonstrated. In any event, whatever fears there are about possible misuse of hypnotic drugs, they are outweighed by the constructive possibilities inherent in them. They can and do restore mental health. They can and do safeguard society through application in criminal cases. Their benefits will be enhanced more and more with further research. That research will be sound, for there is great humility among the scientific medical men as to what they do and do not know to date. The end. If you like this type of content, please subscribe. Have a nice day.